With this unit, we cross a divide. Admittedly, it's an artificial divide created by historians. Most historians date what they call the early modern period of Europe from the Renaissance and modern Europe from the French Revolution, which we'll encounter soon. But the 17th century, which we've just dashed through, is really a transitional century that laid the groundwork for what we now call modern Europe. Let's view the transition through the lens of art. You've seen this painting by Rubens before. The work proclaimed in art that war is stupid and destructive, and of course the great wars of the first half of the 17th century were fought over religion, although the pursuit of political power was often in practice the more important motive. Nevertheless, the bloody wars of religion did encourage many 18th century thinkers such as Voltaire and Locke to argue in favor of religious toleration, and especially in Voltaire's case, to criticize the church for promoting conflict and what Voltaire saw as superstition. Stay tuned. These two paintings reveal another crucial 17th century transition. You should recognize Raphael's school of Athens, and you should be able to guess the painter who executed the painting on the right. Yep, it's Vermeer. Note the interior scene and the light cast by a window that fails to give a glimpse outside. What you probably don't know is that Vermeer's astronomer is reading a book that discusses modern astronomical discoveries by Copernicus, Galileo, and other leaders of the scientific revolution. We also see modern, for the time, celestial globe. Raphael included plenty of scientists in his school, but they're all from the ancient world. Vermeer's scientist is a modern man. In fact, scholars think that the model was his friend von Leeuwenhoek, who invented a superior microscope and more or less founded the science of microbiology. So what's the word for science and reason that's based on observation and experiments involving the real world? Well, you may have answered the scientific method, and that is right, but the word I was looking for is empiricism. And I just gave you the answer to the first question on tonight's homework. Rachel Reich's father was also an empiricist. He cataloged the natural world in his laboratories, and his daughter captured that reality on canvas. There may be religious symbolism in the grapes and the wheat, but this painting is mostly about the natural world that we can observe with our eyes and perhaps our microscope. So what point might I be making with these two slides? Well, the 17th century saw much broader contact between Europe and the rest of the world. The encachado style of the screen attests to Mexico's contact with Spain via the Philippines, while the Ming jar in the Dutch landscape was a treasured import from China. Growing knowledge of and fascination with the rest of the world will become a more central theme as we move into the modern era. Okay, last blast from the recent past. What important 17th century development might I be getting at here? The 1600s witnessed the rise of powerful nation-states led by absolute rulers. The rise of absolute monarchies is really best represented by this guy, who didn't show up in our last unit. And that's partly because the College Board didn't stick any French Baroque paintings on the list. Not even this one, an old College Board favorite. But also because I decided to kick off this unit with the one French Baroque work that is on the list, the Palace of Versailles. But first, let's catch up with France and introduce Louis XIV. In France, the religious wars took the form of a civil war between the Catholics and the Calvinist Huguenots, who actually gained control of large chunks of France. Here you see a Protestant painter's depiction of one of the bloodiest episodes from these wars, in which many thousands of Protestants were massacred. The Protestants massacred plenty of Catholics too. But the theological and artistic battles that animated Italian, Flemish, Spanish, even Dutch Baroque art mostly passed France by. In France, politics was usually more important than religion. Marie de Medici's grandson, Louis XIV, ruled France for 72 years. He came to the throne when he was only 7 years old, and so he reigned for most of our Baroque century. Civil war broke out again when Louis XIV was a young boy, this time because the French nobility was revolting against French royal power. Young Louis XIV was forced to flee for his life, and he learned some important lessons from his turbulent youth. When he came of age, he set about establishing strong, centralized rule that revolved around Louis XIV, the Sun King, the way the planets revolved around the sun. Copernicus had indeed triumphed. In 1665, the Sun King summoned the famous Roman architect Bernini, our buddy, to France to design a new east facade for his palace, the Louvre. Here are some of Bernini's sketches of his proposed design, but it just seemed too Italian for French taste. And here's the design that won in the end. You may notice the same architects designed Versailles. Louis XIV rejected curves, high drama, and instead he went for classical, imposing, and horizontal. This is a building that exudes power. But Louis XIV still had a power problem. French nobles continued to resent the re-established central royal power. Louis needed to keep his nobles under control and keep them entertained so they wouldn't have the time or resources to rebel. And this was his solution: a palace complex built 11 miles from the hotbed of noble power, Paris. And here we see the gardens. For some reason, the landscape designer doesn't appear in the College Board identifiers, but I'm sticking him in. What do you notice about the design of these gardens as your eye moves from the front, the formal gardens surrounding the palace, back into the grounds? Well, nature near the palace is fully disciplined by royal power. As the gardens recede, they become more natural, less tame, but nature wasn't allowed all that much rain at Versailles. Laying out the gardens required enormous work. The original woods, grasslands, and marshes were covered with thousands of wheelbarrow loads of dirt. Trees were carted in from all over France, and thousands of men, sometimes entire regiments of the army, took part in building this vast palace. So no single slide or pair of slides can really capture these gardens. Let's take a brief virtual tour. To get to Versailles, one entered through 3 roads that converged at the chateau, with the axes finally joining, not accidentally, in Louis's bedroom. And here are 2 more views of the imposing entrance. We see a few more Baroque touches, but the general impression is stately and horizontally massive. Again, this is all about the weight and might of royal power. And here is Versailles' most famous room, the Hall of Mirrors. Again, it was designed to dazzle in every sense of the word. And of course, the mirrors just magnified the size of the room and the brilliance of candlelit gold. The mirrors were also designed to reflect the magnificent gardens outside the windows. This room looks a little more Baroque, with its curved ceiling and over-the-top decoration. I'm going to move on now to my second lecture in the art of an aristocratic France whose days were numbered.